opened, and the Dow is down. Despite the Senate passing a $2 trillion relief program late last night, investors are laser focused on the unemployment numbers, with more than 3 million Americans filing for unemployment benefits this past week. Let's put it in context. 2 weeks after September 11th, jobless claims peaked at 517,000. The number peaked again during the financial crisis in March of 2009, when 665,000 filed jobless claims. This past week, 3.2 million Americans filed first-time claims. Joining me now to discuss, Doug Holtz-Eakin, president of the American Action Forum. He is the former chief economist of the President's Council of Economic Advisors and former director of the Congressional Budget Office, and Ben White, chief economic correspondent for Politico and host of Politico's Money podcast. Doug, I want to go to you first because Secretary Mnuchin was just on CNBC, and he said these high jobless numbers are not relevant. Does he have a point? You can't really compare this to the financial crisis or even 9/11. There's never been a time in history where the U.S. government told the economy to shut down.
I think they're relevant. I mean, those are 3 million Americans who have lost their job and are now going to have to rely on the unemployment insurance system for their welfare. But it's true that this situation is not comparable to either 2008 and the financial crisis or post 9/11. This is a much bigger economic event. It's different in character, and it has to be responded to differently. And hopefully we'll continue to do that well.
My apologies. The Dow is now up. I got those numbers delayed. Ben, but to that very point, the Dow is now up. Assuming the stimulus, or really the relief bill, goes through, you're going to see a huge amount of support for small business, big business, and individuals.
Yeah, I think that's why the market's up. I think it's also up because there were whisper numbers much higher than 3 million. I saw numbers as high as 7. So I think there's some relief that it doesn't look quite as cataclysmic as some feared it would, though this is a massive number. But that's exactly why it was so important that the Senate finally got their bill passed last night, because as you said, this is a massive extension of unemployment benefits, the additional $600 per week, the extension to 4 months. That is critical for all these people to have income that keeps coming in so they can, pay their rent and get groceries and the mortgages and all the rest of it. And then there is massive lending available to small and mid-sized businesses, particularly through the Fed. This bill has $434 billion in it to back up Fed lending to small and mid-sized businesses, which they can leverage to up to $4 trillion. So we need to keep people who've lost their jobs getting cash, and then get these businesses that are failing en masse to stay around, so when we can flip the switch on the economy, they've got jobs and incomes to come back to. This is the committee to save the world right now, to save this economy from sliding from recession to depression.
I think it's really important,
earlier
Stephanie,
this
that
morning, yes?
Yeah, I think what Ben said is really important. There will be the capability to get a little bit ahead of this and keep these businesses alive and preserve the business infrastructure for when we get past the pandemic. But we're not over the finish line yet. The House hasn't passed this. The President hasn't signed it. The money has not gone out the door. And I think the slower that happens, the more we're going to see big numbers like 3.1 million in uninsurance claims. We need to get ahead of this and prevent people from losing their jobs. That's the key right now.
Earlier this morning, Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell spoke to our colleague Savannah Guthrie on the Today Show. I want to share a bit on this.
The message is this, that this is a unique situation. It's not like a typical downturn. We've asked people to step back from economic activity, really to make an investment in our public health. They're doing that for the public good. And this bill that's just passed is going to try to provide relief and stability to those people. The Federal Reserve is working hard to support you now, and our policies will be very important when the recovery does come, to make that recovery as strong as possible.
Doug, here's another unique situation. What does it tell you about the vacuum of leadership in our government, and how scared our country must be right now when the Fed chair goes on America's morning show to reassure the American people we're okay? What does that tell you about the moment we're in?
I'm really glad you asked that question. As it turns out, I looked at my wife this morning. I said, the definition of a crisis? When the Fed chair is on the Today Show. This is a crisis. And we really do need not just the tools. The Fed has fired all of its artillery. The Congress is in the process of giving the administration enormous amounts of not just money, but programs that can infuse the economy with cash. But now we need to articulate the strategy. The American public needs to know that this isn't just $2 trillion that we're going to dump out there. We have a plan to get small businesses the cash they need so they don't need to lay people off, large businesses the cash they need so they can do the same thing. Big relief for those who have already been laid off in the form of the extended UI and paid sick leaves. You know, this fits together and it matches the problem we face. That's the kind of articulation that would be beneficial so that they have some sense that, yeah, we can get through this, there's a plan to get through it, and after that we can go back to the life that we used to understand.
Put that in perspective. Before 1994, the Fed used to not even alert markets when they would raise or lower rates. They would just figure it out. Now you've got the Fed chair telling the American people it's all going to be okay. It's a different world. Doug, Ben, thank you both so much. We're going to leave it there after the break. This relief